my screen. Y'all can't see that. Remember that we do not allow AI tools in. I saw one trying to come in when we started letting people in, and we have removed that. We will remove any that we see pop up joining the meeting. We're going to talk about evaluation flexibility options today in our LEA contacts. We're going to start with the options. The evaluation flexibility options will open in TN Compass on May the 8th. I wanted you all to have this information beforehand so that you can start meeting with your teams and making the decisions about these options. I know most of you don't change options from year to year, but I wanted you to have time with the information just in case. So that the flexibility survey will be open in TN Compass on May the 8th, and it will close on June the 13th. You must have your options put in by June the 13th. Our upcoming office hours at our May the 8th evaluation configurator office hour, that's our regularly scheduled office hour. We will talk about end of the year actions, what you need to do to be closing out the year, and we'll review the process of putting this information in TN Compass. And then on May the 22nd and June the 5th, we will have an office hour. It's just going to be an open office hour where if you have questions, you can come and we'll help you walk through. If you have questions about decisions that you're trying to make, we will be on and try to help you guide you through those questions that you have. And there is the link to that that June the 22nd and June 5th meeting. The Tennessee State Board of Education policy allows districts and charters to have the flexibility in use of the observation model that you're using, the growth for non-tested teachers, whether you use school climate surveys, how you handle administrator evaluations, and in the use of individual growth scores, which we refer to as the 4-5 Trump rule. So districts and charters must implement the team model or another state board approved model. For districts, teacher evaluation options are limited to the following models: Team, TIM, Project Coach, and Tiger. For the selections of Team, Tiger, and TIM, TN Compass will, excuse me. TN Compass will configure team for the administrator evaluation model. For the selections of Project Coach, TN Compass will configure Project Coach as the administration model. So Tim and Tiger also use team for their administrator evaluation model. For charters, charter schools can use any of the approved models listed here or a more specific state board approved model for their charter. Districts and charters have flexibility in pacing. The number of observations required for teachers' pacing is set based on the licensure type and either the previous year LOE of the teacher or the previous year's individual growth score. So districts and charters that use team can set pacing using these two options. You can use the previous year's LOE to guide the number of observations, and it has to be the LOE of the prior year unless that year is PYE, and then it will go back to the next year. But if there is not an LOE for the prior year, the teacher will be set to full pacing. For teachers with individual growth scores, either from TPAS, the Student Growth Portfolio, or the Alternative Growth Measure from the Universal Reading Screener, they will use the previous year's individual growth score to guide the number of observations. So you have those two options. Everybody uses the LOE, or teachers who generate an individual growth score would use that individual growth score, regardless of which is higher. You could have a situation with a teacher has an individual growth score of a 4 And their LOE, if it were calculated, would be a 5. If your district chooses to use the individual growth score, that teacher would have an LOE. Their pacing would be based on their individual growth score of a 4. So instead of having one for a professional license, instead of having one observation, they would be required to have 2 based on their LOE. Once this selection is made, we cannot change it during the year. So make sure that you select the correct thing when you complete your survey. The option to use CLASS for pre-K teachers is available. CLASS is a pre-K specific tool that districts implementing TEAM may opt to use for pre-K only. Information and observer certification can be obtained from Misty Moody. So if you decide that you want to use CLASS as your observation rubric for evaluations, you may. But we need to know that at the beginning of the year, and that will be an optional flexibility survey. So you also have growth options for non-tested teachers. Each teacher in charter must use at least one alternative growth measure, or AGM, for non-tested teachers. We have 2 state board approved alternative growth measure options: a student growth portfolio or a state board approved universal reading screener. For the state board approved universal reading screener to generate a growth score for teachers, it must be the same screener that is used to satisfy the requirements of the Tennessee Literacy Success Act. There is a list of approved universal reading screeners there if you need them. If the district or charter receives voluntary pre-K funding for the 25-26 school year, TCA requires that the district or charter must implement either a student growth portfolio or an alternative growth measure from the URS in grades pre-K and kindergarten. If you receive voluntary pre-K money, you must implement one of these 2 in pre-K and kindergarten. That satisfies the requirement also of that you must implement at least one. So that can satisfy that requirement. These districts and charters may choose to add additional student growth portfolio models or AGM growth measures for additional non-tested teacher groups in other grades and areas. However, they are required to have it for pre-K and kindergarten. These are our options for non-tested teacher groups. So for pre-K, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, you have 2 options. You could use a portfolio or the state board approved universal reading screener. PE, fine arts, and world languages have the option of a portfolio. According to state board policy, districts and charters may opt to use student surveys as 5% of a teacher's level of overall effectiveness. That 5% comes off of the observation score. Currently approved surveys include Tennessee School Climate Survey, Tripod, My Student Survey, and Panorama. Information about those can be found on the department website if you click for student surveys. These are not required. I can tell you that very, very few districts use these. Administrator flexibility, you have 2 options for administrators. You can either enter one summative score for each indicator based on multiple options throughout the school year, or you can enter 2 scores for each indicator, where the fall score will count as 1/3 of the average and the spring score will count as 2/3 of the average observation score. The 4 or 5 trump rule allows teachers who score a level 4 or 5 on their current year's individual growth score from either TMOS, a portfolio, or the alternative growth measure from URS to use their individual growth score for the entirety of their overall level of effectiveness, regardless, which is higher here. So you could have a teacher who, if you averaged all of their components together, would have a 5, but if their individual growth score is a 4, their LOE is going to be a 4. The same is true of the opposite. You could have a teacher who, if you average everything together, the teacher has a 3, but if their individual growth score is a 5, then that teacher automatically gets a 5. We also will have LEA contacts. We'll be collecting those again this year. We have added so that you can add 2 people as contacts for each area, except for director of schools or CMO lead. You can only have one of those. So you can list up to 2 people for each of those areas. The LEA contacts have, we still have the same. You're going to have director of schools, superintendent designee, evaluation configurator, tassel configurator, testing coordinator, and education recognition contact, educator contact, portfolio lead, AGM lead, human resources, diff pay, and educator diversity are only for districts. Those 3 requirements are only for districts. Charters do not have to submit those.
Amy,
so your next steps.
Can you hear me, Amy? I got a quick question.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the evaluation configurator, we do not have rights to do an administrative edit, correct? Is that just the superintendent or superintendent designee?
I need to check on that. I really thought you had that you could do that.
I know,
it maybe can be configured.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a configuration.
Your superintendent can go in and configure you to have that, but it's automatic for the superintendent. It's not automatic for you. But you're to configure it, they just go into the assignments, staff assignments page and hit that configure button and mark it.
All right, because I've got staff assignments where I can do that, but like I had somebody to click on the wrong teacher for PYE.
Yeah.
And so I tried email and they said, you don't have the rights. So I got Dr. Williams to do it, but okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So your next steps are to discuss these options with your decision makers before they open May the 8th. So you all will be ready to enter those. It does have to be signed by your superintendent. So whoever puts the options in, you can save them there, but your superintendent will have to log into TN Compass and sign this. Evaluation flexibility option guidance will be on the team website under statute and policy, evaluation flexibility options. And these are our email supports, team questions, portfolio questions, RV questions, and these are others from the department if you have questions about anything else. Appreciate you coming today.
We do have a question in the chat.
Okay.
And Sandra, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. So you're asking the options for growth versus
right. So we test our 2nd grade students, but because they don't generate a growth score, their own growth score, are they still considered their only options for growth are the universal reading screener and the portfolio? Is that correct?
That is correct. They do not generate individual TBUS scores.
Okay. So in the past, sometimes they wanted to take like 3rd grade feeder composite, but from the looks of that chart, that's their only options is the universal reading screener or portfolio.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You have a K2 school, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So for your K2 school, they do not generate any school-wide growth. So for their growth measure selection in TN Compass, it will be a custom feeder option, and they can take the early literacy if you give the 2nd grade assessment in both the prior and the current year to get that 3rd grade score. Yes, those will be a custom, but that is not an individual growth score. If you want them to have an individual growth score, then you either need to do the portfolio or the URS individual growth score.
I just wanted to make sure I was clear on my options. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And Sandra, just for clarification, that school-wide composite, that's for non-tested teachers. So your 2nd grade, if they don't do a portfolio or the URS for individual, they are non-tested. That 2nd grade assessment is not consider them a tested grade. Even though they're taking a test, they're non-tested because 2nd grade assessment does not generate scores for the teacher.
You're on mute.
You're
Sandra.
on mute.
That's what I was thinking, but then it looks like on that one screen that she showed, since they are non-tested, then the only options would be the portfolio or the universal reading screener.
If you want them to be tested. Yeah. If you want them to get a 35% growth score, if you want any of those non-tested groups, they either do a portfolio or they do the screener for growth. And then that turns their LOE composite into a tested grade and they get 35% growth. If they don't do an individual growth score, their non-tested LOE, their growth comes from the school-wide composite. Does that make sense? So yes, the only option for a first or pre-K, K1 or 2 teacher to get their own score, like a TCAP teacher gets their own TVAS score, is the portfolio.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? All right. I appreciate you all coming. You got about 15 minutes back today. I'm sure you can use that this week. I hope testing is going well or is over for you. I'm not sure the exact dates of it, but good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.